Hello there. Now, this is going to be a pretty short presentation, but it's going to seem like it's long because we're covering three small civilizations: Mycenaeans, Minoans, and the Cycladic. Now, there are going to be even smaller civilizations kind of tucked or added within there. Don't be intimidated, though. A lot of names here. Let's be honest, these are the main things you need to be aware of. The Cyclades, or the Cycladic region here, Crete, home of Knossos, Sparta, Mycenae, Athens, Delphi, and of course Mount Olympus and Troy over here. This was taken from student notes, and I just wanted to share it with you. You see this big map, see all the names and the crazy words you have to try and pronounce. These are the main ones. Not many words to remember, but you definitely do need to know these. Corbelling, fans, freeze, you're going to be using that for the next 2,000 years. Repousser, repousse, I'll take either one. If you pronounce French, please let me know how to say it. Terracotta, still used. Tholos, dromos, sorry I moved that around, I did not mean to. So if I can get it right, hold on. There we go. Tholos, dromos, those words you'll need to know as well. So, let's start with the Cycladic civilization. Now, just because we're moving in chapters and we're moving forward doesn't mean that we're necessarily moving forward in time. These are people that were existing while the people in the ancient Near East were flourishing and building these massive ziggurats and learning all sorts of things about ceramics. These people, Bronze Age in nature, still constructed figures of their own. Now, if we look at this main figure here in the center, the largest one, we see that it has a similar pose to the Venus figure, holding its belly, showing its breasts and a bit of a lump for the belly. You might think that it is a fertility figure because of the pose, because of the features that are pronounced. Could it be a man? It could. We can see that the pubis, or three lines, have been incised to symbolize the pubis, or the pubis region. Throughout all the figures, though, they have this very symmetrical, geometric type face. It doesn't allude to gender, but it does allude to facial features. The strange thing about these figures is that they're all funerary. Most of the stuff we know about the Cycladic civilization comes from their funerary practices. These geometric faced bodies, mostly female, less male, were all found in graves, and they vary in size. I've seen the middle one in person, and it's fairly thin. You might think, how did they stand it up? Well, they didn't really stand it up. It was horizontal in nature. You can stand it up here, but it was found flat. Looking at this figure, it's easy to assume that these are men, especially with the incision around the pubis region. But what's nice is the advancements they've made in stone carving. While this civilization flourished 5,000 years ago, look at what they're doing with sculpture. Into this hard stone, they're able to bring arms forward, they project, they can carve through the body, and now we have, very different from the Venus of Willendorf, we have figures with space and volume. They project, they come forward, they have a real presence. While they are still attached to a base, they have a presence all their own. So, the question I would be asking all of you is, what's this sculpture about? Did that person just make the winning touchdown? Are they being presented for tribute? Is this the ancient or prehistoric Hunger Games? What exactly is going on? Or is it two men venerating a female figure? Is it two men worshiping a woman because she got pregnant? It's like, yeah, gonna add to that family. What exactly is going on? We don't know. But it's good to try and guess, to think about it. Like I've said before, I want you actively viewing, actively thinking about what it is you're looking at. And it is the next piece that really does raise thought. Now we have a female figure that's clearly not holding herself, but is clearly accentuating parts of her body. Bare-breasted, huge breasts sticking out. Is she an exotic dancer? She certainly looks exotic, holding the snakes in her hand and with a cat on top of her head. Now, if I were to ask the class, what does it mean? One person might say, well, she's a witch, she's evil, snakes are bad, snakes are sinful. Well, that's using a very specific set of definitions of what is evil and referencing what is evil. Think back then. What kind of people were they? They were gatherers. They were agrarian. What does that mean? They farm. So what do you do when you farm? Well, you grow food, you collect it, you keep it, you eat it. What happens? What are the enemies? Well, mice, rabbits, deer, dogs, whatever else. They come and they eat the food that you try and grow. Well, is there anything that eats them? Yes. Cats and snakes. So snakes aren't necessarily bad creatures. Yes, they can be dangerous, but here, think about what is going on here. She looks healthy from the breasts, from the wide hips, from the face. It's not a skinny face. She's a strong, healthy woman. And she is holding two snakes, which could be symbols of evil, but here seem to be images of power, as she brings her body forward and has this strong pose. On top of her, she holds another mouser, the cat. Other images, clear images that we are aware of from the Minoan culture, are bulls, double axes, trees, and their very unique columns. Outdoor shrines, and of course this goddess holding cats. Talking about the Minoan civilization, we have a very interesting sort of architecture, and something interesting about their columns. If you're going to see a king, the earliest kingly hall we have is Persepolis, and we talked about that in the Lamassu, but here we don't have Lamassu, we don't have genies, and we don't have sphinxes. We have columns. We also have what we think of as a mudroom. So imagine you're a simple fisherman, you're finally called to see the king, maybe you want to ask for something, and you step up to the door. It's a strong, solid building, it doesn't have any windows. And right in front of you, like two guards, are these massive columns. You look through the door, you can smell the fire, you can smell the incense, or perhaps the smell of cooking food. You look through the door, through the halls, or through the doorways, and you see this massive, massive fire. Number two is the hearth, this massive pit of fire. And you're not even in the main building yet. You're in the kind of like a porch, a mudroom even. Look at the diagram and make sure you understand what each of these numbers refer to. Then you step into room number 3. You still don't see the king yet. You see this fire which is getting bigger, and you see more columns. It's like, what's going on here? Well, it doesn't necessarily make you feel as small as you might feel inside the mortuary temple at Abu Simbel. Which one was it? Abu Simbel? Is it Delberry? Is it Luxor? Where was that mortuary temple? Do you feel small like you were there or at Persepolis? Or do you have a different feeling? It's only once you step into the main room that you get a hint of where the king is. The king is not there, so perhaps if a sniper wanted to come in with a bow and arrow, they just shoot an arrow down the hall. Well, that's not going to happen. They have to get to that main room. Where do they find the king? Behind one of the columns, standing tall like a guard. Behind that column is the king, ready to look upon you. Now, I'm showing you a piece of Egyptian art because I want you to look at the comparisons. Compare the two. Look at the color. Look at the figure. What are the differences between Egyptian figures and Aegean figures? This technique is called fresco. There are two types of fresco. There is, of course, Buon fresco, and then there is secco fresco. It's important that you understand the differences between the two. You will be tested on it later. Something you need to be aware of is that this is a reconstruction on top of the original. Parts of the original fresco are still there, and parts of this fresco have been added, or restored, if you would. To give you an idea, these parts here restored, these parts here, just for example, this darker part, if it's a darker blue, this is original. Now, again, let's flash back. Here's the Egyptian, here's the Aegean. What differences do you see? Well, like the Egyptians, they painted men and women differently. Men were one color, women were another color. We can see that Aegean bodies are more alive. They're not so stiff, they're not based upon a grid. Therefore, they have a more organic feeling to them. They look more dynamic, they look more like they're moving even, especially in the case of this boy or youth jumping over a bull. That movement is accentuated by the shape of the body, by the simple fact that it's not trying to stand there in this rigid Egyptian pose. Looking at the animal, it's more than just this kind of attempt at natural photorealistic representation. We have a symbolic representation, rather, of a bull. The legs spread out as if it's flying across or going very quickly. The eye still, very Egyptian in nature as it front faces in very high contrast. That's one similarity, definitely, between Egyptian and Aegean. We get still the profile face with a forward-facing eye. It's in the work here that we begin to see a little more, we begin to gain more insight into the life of these island peoples. We see that another animal besides bull became a popular motif, and that is the dolphin. If you've ever sailed or been out on the open water, you know that you know that dolphins are a sailor's friend. Dolphins speak to safety and not evil at all. And so here, the dolphins in their blues and golds dance about the different boats. We see that the boats are painted differently. Some more simple, some more elaborate, obviously alluding to wealth and means. We also get the idea that some are closer and some are farther away because of their placement in the fresco. This becomes more apparent when we look at the destination of Knossos, some being closer and then closer to the top of the mountain and the topmost point. Now you might think, so that's a city? Well, yes, it is. And Knossos is unorganized for a reason. We'll get to that in a minute. I want you to look at this image of Thera and the two boys. And right here we're talking about the people of Thera. Where is Thera? Make a note. It's known as something else, and the book talks about that. Be aware of Thera, be aware of Knossos, ancient Thera and its name now. Looking here at this fresco from Thera, the two boys boxing, you see that one has long hair, one has shorter hair, one has a glove, the other has possibly a strap. One appears to be hitting or making contact, while the other does not appear to be making contact. So I ask you, which one is the new person and which one is the veteran? If you guess the one on the left is the veteran, you'd probably be right. Looking at his dress, looking at his demeanor, you see that that person is looking up, active, whereas before, typically eyes were looking straight at us, forward. Again, this is another reconstruction. You see the flat images here are more a restoration. The patchy elements here, or somewhat darker elements, are original. In the Crocus Gatherers, I wanted to add some lines here so you can see how dynamic and how moving the bodies were. These are people that didn't just stand still. These are figures that were alive, full of movement. So why is the sea important to the Therans and Minoans? Well, because you're not here to answer, I'll go ahead and tell you. The sea, just looking at this fresco, it was life. It was their means of transport. It was their means of food. It was their main defense, their first defense. Cities on these islands did not have walls because the sea was their wall. It was their protection. The sea was their life. Moving from sculpture and painting now to architecture, I ask you, where would the frieze be? And what is a frieze? Well, a frieze is a decoration on a wall, typically above a passage, a portal, an entryway. And the frieze would be in A. What type of construction is this? This is post and lintel. The frieze would be on the lintel or above the lintel. B is a type of arch. It starts with a C. It's called a corbelled arch. And most of us have done this when we were children. You stack rocks up, or you stack dominoes, perhaps when you're bored. And you stack one domino and move it over. You try to move the domino as close to the edge as possible before it falls off, and then maybe try and stack another. By laying domino or brick after brick in a row, you get what's called a course. And by staggering their position, you can then create a corbelled arch. It is this type of architecture, both corbelling and post and lintel, which was used to create Knossos, the palace at Knossos. This city was really a meandering collection of different buildings, different styles, and it stands to reason that that meandering is only a natural extension of growth. You know, if you start with one building that took, say it takes 5 months, or no, say they work really hard, say it takes 4 weeks to build one massive building. Over that time, you know, people get sick, seasons change, maybe they have to go harvest, it takes time to get the rocks, things change. So they build one house here, but then other people want to build another house over here. The result is the meandering confusion, which is Knossos. The layout of the city is not organized like we think of as a modern city. And if we go back to this picture here, you can see the different colored buildings, the different organization of those buildings. What's unique to Minoan architecture is the columns. Now, columns aren't necessarily unique, but it is their construction that is unique to this culture. Their columns tapered. They were more narrow at the bottom and wider at the top, which gave a more profound or more intimidating view if you were close up to them. Imagine you're walking along these massive columns. Now, remember that people in this time were shorter than us, but were smaller, so that would create definitely more a springing, intimidating effect. Above these columns is a very simple frieze of white circles. So remember, column, and what are the three parts of a column? The base, the shaft, the capital. Above the capital is the entablature, and on the entablature is the frieze. Now here, we have an example of 3 types of construction. What are those 3 types? And what part of this image is Minoan in nature? Well, because you're not here to answer, I'll answer for you. You have the post and lintel, 2 massive stones being capped off with a lintel that weighs even more than the 2 together. You have the corbelled arch. What is the 3rd type of construction? Well, it's a construction that's based somewhat in legend and somewhat in mystery, because we don't quite know how they did these things. For those of you that read the Odyssey, you might remember the name Polyphemus. If you don't remember Polyphemus, you probably remember what he is, because you saw them when you watched Wrath of the Titans or whatever Titans movie it was that featured them. Polyphemus was a Cyclops. And who else but the massive Cyclops could carry such a stone? Cyclopean architecture is the 3rd type of construction. Now, what part of this is Minoan in style? While it might not be apparent here, it is apparent here that we have a Minoan column. And above the Minoan column is the entablature, typical from Knossos, and above that column, the column really actually served as a pedestal for a goddess. The goddess on top of the column raised above these 2 roaring lions, and this gate is referred to as the Lion Gate. So, getting back to architecture, and Cyclopean architecture in particular, I want to point your attention to these tombs. Now, what are these 2 black arrows? The black arrows refer to very specific vocabulary terms. The dromos, the pathway leading up to the tomb which is the tholos. The dromos and the tholos were underground and made using courses of stone, long courses or rows of stone stacked and staggered, creating this honeycomb hideout, if you would. please keep your attention fixed upon this very massive stone here. The reason I want you to keep your eye fixed on that big stone is because that lintel is probably the single most impressive lintel you will ever see. From here, the treasury of Atreus is pretty unassuming. Remember that Tholos, is it Tholos? Yes, it is Tholos. Remember the difference between Dromos and Thomos. It is the Tholos, which is underground, so unless you didn't see the Dromos, you wouldn't see the Tholos. There you see a very tightly pointed corbelled arch. There's the very simple looking lintel and a very tall stack of stones. From the inside, though, you become more aware of the size of that lintel. Ladies and gentlemen, who else but the Cyclops could put that lintel in place? Now you might be thinking, yes, it's a big stone, but surely they know how to do it. But guys, I need you to understand, that lintel, that stone, weighs over 120 tons. How could ancient Aegean man move such a stone in place and fit it so exactly inside the Tholos? Who else but the Cyclops? Hence, Cyclopean architecture. Remember, now we have load-bearing, we have post and lintel, we have corbelling, and now we have Cyclopean architecture. Short-lived, fascinating, but native only to the Aegean chapter. One final look inside this Tholos. We can see the courses of stones inside the treasury of Atreus, associated with the Mycenaeans rather than the Minoans. We've kind of been dancing about different cultures here. We've looked at the Cycladic, the Minoans, the Therans, and now the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans given to us, knowledge of the Mycenaeans given to us by Heinrich Schliemann, a man who grew up with stories of the Greek myths, the Battle of Troy, the Trojan War, Odysseus, Agamemnon, and so many others. Fascination with this led him to find the ancient city of Troy. Fascination with this drove him to find some of these cities and ruins steeped in legend. Now, my question is not who is this person, but what technique made this mask? And you'll see that this does not follow the Egyptian canon of representation. This is a face with character. You see he has very thin lips, a sharp nose, large ears, but that's really a result of the technique. What made it? Well, I'll tell you how it was made. If you take your hand and put it below your shirt, basically I'm telling you to put your hand inside your shirt, okay? And push your fingers forward. Think of that sheet of gold as your shirt. You see, what they did was they would beat gold. They would take gold, which is naturally soft, and beat it into a fine sheet. And then, with very particular tools, they would push into the gold, like your fingers, in through the shirt. Thus, the technique is called repousse, or repousser. I typically say repousse because I think of pousse café, which means pressed coffee. You push the coffee through, you make the coffee by pushing, repousse. So that was the technique there. We've looked at three civilizations, the Cycladic, the Minoan, and the Mycenaean, each rich in decoration, rich in their own unique expressions. Taking a look at this one, while we don't have the funerary work that we have the Cycladic, looking at their buildings and seeing the decorations, we know that this is a culture that valued art. So much so, they decorated their floors, the walls, the ceilings with decoration all over. What does that tell you? If you go into a house that has no decoration at all, either they're boring or they can't afford decoration. But a building like this, with so much art, so much decoration, speaks to the wealth, the means, and the fact that they lived in a peaceful time so they could decorate their homes. It says a great deal. That's it for the lecture. I'd like to remind you that the online quiz and the study guide is found here. Simply go to Chapter 6 and select Multiple Choice Quiz. As always, if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, or concerns, simply email me, leave a message on my voicemail, or drop by the office. Best of luck, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in class. Thanks.